Everybody, you're very welcome to this USI disaffiliation debate brought to you by the University Times and the Phil. So first of all, just going to run through the format. Basically, there'll be sort of even be in two parts. So first of all, we'll have actually we'll do an entrance vote first, just to see where everyone lies at the beginning before the debate. So we'll do that just after I outline the format. Then we'll have 3 or 6 speakers speaking. The format of that will be 7-minute speeches. They can ask each other points of information. But points of information won't be open to the audience for that point. But then after that, sort of 42-minute debate, there'll be an opportunity for everyone here to make either a 2-minute floor speech or else ask a question to any of our panelists here about anything you like. So we'll have that afterwards, and then we'll just do an exit vote. And that'll be it. Should be wrapped up in about an hour's time. So first of all, I guess, if all those on the motion that this House will disaffiliate from USI, if all those who would like to vote in favour at this point could just raise your hands, I'm just going to count that. And there's 50. For those who will be named against disaffiliating from USI. That's 39 there. So 50 to 39 is the vote before we start. So without further ado, guys, I'm just going to introduce our first speaker. Oh, sure. Okay, we'll count you insurers as well. If all those who are undecided would like to raise your hands. That's 26 unsures. Okay, so we got 50 pro, 39 against, and 26 unsures at the moment. So I guess we'll just get going with the debate then. So in first opposition we have David Byrne, law student.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, as far as I'm concerned, USI is a bureaucratic, undemocratic mess. And if there's any part of you at all that's undecided about what way you're voting this week, then I would encourage you or ask you to listen to this side of the House when you're considering whether or not you might vote yes. And certainly I think that you should. What I'm going to do now is I want to clear up a few of the non-issues that I think have been bandied around in the run-up to this debate, and then get into the meat of why USI is frankly a joke. So I'm going to get straight into it. 7 minutes isn't too much time. The first issue, and it's really something that's annoyed me quite a lot, that seems to be coming up from the No campaign, is this welfare question. This idea that we'll be losing welfare training if we disaffiliate from USI. And it is true that the only training we'll be able to avail of is pink training. But the problem is that they're happy standing up here and saying, well, if you don't acquiesce to our political agenda, we're going to cut off your students from access to like a qualified welfare counsellor. That's absolutely everything that's wrong with student politics, for someone to stand up and say, if you don't agree to us on our political wing, then we're not going to give your students access to things that are quite crucial to them from a social and political perspective. I think that John needs to stand up here and tell us why it's okay that his organisation can cut students off on a personal, social level from services that they need, just because his organisation is bitter that we no longer conform to the political standards that they set forward. Because I think, frankly, that position is pretty despicable. The second question, or non-issue I want to look at here, is this idea of the alternative of reform. And that's something that I've heard quite a lot from Jack, but I haven't actually heard anything on reform. The only thing I could find when he was directly asked how he would rectify Trinity's main problems, its problems with standing in the USI, this is the answer that he gave. I think there will have to be a campaign of reform in USI no matter what happens. The whole campaign will be calling for reform and trust in the USI. I think this campaign is contingent on continued effective performance in the USI because the USI has made a lot of effort this summer to make itself more relevant and make more of an impact. The problem is that I can literally apply that to anything. Like if you came up to me on the street and you were like, how could we make fruit pastilles more popular again? That's the answer I give. If I had a conversation with an American student about healthcare reform in the US and I had no idea what to say, that's exactly the answer I would give. And in fairness, Jack, I wasn't able to find anything more than wordy platitudes in that regard. So if you want to stand up and say, change it from the inside, tell us what you're going to do to convince the people who have no agreement and no consensus with Trinity, bar for going into their campuses and campaigning. Because I really just don't get it. Right, let's look at the meat of the issue as regards USI. Let's look at the myth of this being one union with one voice. Like, principally, is that a big deal? I don't think so. Like, it makes sense to me in terms of this idea of democracy, that when you're a significant minority, like Trinity is, then you can form an alternative opinion. You can form an alternative voice. You don't have to bow down and just acquiesce to the majority simply because it is the majority. Like, it's the essence of democracy for us to say we're not being listened to, we're going to find an alternative channel. Like, I've heard arguments from people like Eamonn saying that we should feel guilty. We should feel a need to conform to this union because it's our union. This isn't a trade union. It's a union of unions. And like, it operates in the context of us being citizens of Ireland, not citizens of USI. You don't have a civic duty, and there's no civic guilt to saying, I don't agree with you guys, and I want to explore alternative channels, right? But like, principally, it doesn't even matter in this context, because practically, the USI is literally nowhere near to being a representative institution for students, right? Let's crunch the facts on that. How many of our sabbatical officers who decide all of the sabbatical officers for USI campaign on the basis of which USI sabbatical officers they would vote in? Literally none. Like on any manifesto, no thanks. Do we ever see that? Never. Like, how many students actually vote for our sabbatical officers? On a good day, like half. So are these guys actually representing us in a democracy? Not at all. If we were, no thank you. If we disregard for a second this idea that they represent us and we're happy to ignore that, do they even function like technically as a democracy? Literally, like, not at all. Again, like, they didn't ask us when their officers occupied a government building last year with a week of food supplies and fair play, a chemical toilet. Lasting literally, no joke, 15 minutes. They didn't ask us. That doesn't strike me as democratic. They had no regard for democracy when it came to the joke of an attempt at a referendum, which was supposed to decide us as students, our national policy on peace, right? Apart from the fact that 100,000 fraudulent votes were attempted to be registered within our referendum, NUI Galway just didn't participate. 4 ITs and NCI, who were crucial votes to the ultimate decision to support 100% exchequer funding, had less than 100 people turn out for their referendums. And NUI Galway, at the ultimate Congress, when they weren't getting their way, decided to walk out. Like, Jack, John, Eamonn, like, how can you even call that a democracy? Like, what is that? Tell us why exactly we should feel like we're being represented by that institution. Right, let's forget for a second that it's literally not even vaguely democratic. Does it do a good job as a lobby? Again, not at all, right? Can it and will it can't? Like, breaking it down to its simplest, here's the problem. USI, at their relatively farcical Congress last May, decided to maintain their current stance on fees, which is 100% exchequer funding. That's something that John, no matter his personal political opinion, is mandated to pursue at the HEA meetings that they love to talk about. On the same day of that USI Congress where they made that decision, the HEA executive, Tom Boland, said unequivocally, that is not happening. That is never happening. At this stage, a few months later, we now know that by 2015, we will have seen in the past few years a doubling of the student contribution to €3,000. No, thank you. They have literally no leg to stand on, even if they weren't only 1 vote in 8 at that meetings. That is literally just like entirely valueless. If you listen to John and you look at his manifesto, this idea of change, like he says, let's change to a lobby group to get partners on board. Is the best way to make a lobby group to take an extremely ineffective, cumbersome lobby group that is USI and suddenly to start west-winging it and just calling it a lobby group and then saying that that's suddenly going to work? If you approach teachers' unions, farmers' organisations, and you tell them, in the context of the cutbacks that they're suffering, that what you want is 100% exchequer funding for students, and that students shouldn't have to bear any cost, they're probably going to ask you at a time whether or not you're joking, right? If you look at his manifesto, he tells you there's going to be a 6-month media campaign leading us up to the budget. The budget's in like a month, and I'm not the most savvy person in the world, but I'm pretty sure they've done essentially nothing. No one ever goes onto the USI website because why would you go onto the USI website? Absolutely, I believe that there's an alternative to this, because this is nothing, right? The alternative is to take the students' union that did manage in the last few months, I'll finish up in a moment, to get us a pay divide when we're paid the registration fee, that did manage to get banks on board to a student loan scheme, that have managed successfully to negotiate with external bodies to get a better deal for students. Moreover, I just think we're underselling ourselves if we say that we can't do better than that. We get in regularly world-famous celebrities, Nobel laureates, we organised orchestras to say that we can't do a better job than the USI has done in the context of the failures of USI for the past 5-6 years. To me, it's just extremely underselling ourselves. I think this disaffiliation will either be Rory Quinn's worst nightmare or his best friend. He'll either be pissed off that he no longer has USI at a table with a mandate that he already knows and that the public is happy to accept. He can never accept or tolerate, or else he's going to be delighted to finally have a group who are willing to negotiate and compromise that he might be able to supply with something he can actually give. I move to vote yes. Thank you.
And I welcome representing the No campaign here to the Jack Leahy.
An immediate response to the questions they've asked about my choice of words. If I'm going to be the person who's going to advocate some sort of reform, it's that we directly elect the president and we involve more students in the decision-making process. Now, I'm not the person to spearhead reform. We can talk about this after the debate if we want to, but that's just a direct response. Reform is what I'm going to be talking about, at least for the first few seconds, because I think it's necessary, but I think reform and not disengagement is going to be what creates a strong national student body. Now, the reasons for this debate was called are absolutely not illegitimate. They're reasonable concerns, reasonable criticisms, but I completely believe that they're short-sighted and absolutely not conducive to the long-term benefit of Trinity students. This referendum is about much more than 1 year and 1 week of a campaign. This referendum is about 53 years of campaigning on a single student voice. I'm going to begin first of all by addressing some myths that have made their way into the campaign, the likes of which Dave was complicit in spreading, at least back in February anyway. Okay, at the moment upon registration, you pay €8 to be a member of the Union of Students in Ireland. €5 of that goes directly to capitate the USI, and €3 goes to sending your own officers to USI congresses and councils so they can represent you. These kind of charges are voted through by a special capitations committee in college. I'm not sure how many people are aware of it, but you're represented by the SU president at that meeting. In his time in office, and I think he'll talk about that when he gets up here, Ryan sounded out a €6 replacement charge that you would pay upon registration to a disaffiliated union that had absolutely no interest or didn't evoke any interest in any members of the Capitations Committee. His colleagues who sat with him on the student union committees last year said that his plans for an alternative were vague, watery, and he couldn't even come up with a coherent idea himself. In fact, he was so sure that he could use this supposedly neutral position to push for disaffiliation that he came up with all sorts of idealised alternatives to USI representation. I'd really like to hear him come up here and clarify them, because as I said, from what I've heard, really he couldn't come up with an alternative himself, leading this campaign essentially from behind. So let's also address the perception that Trinity students have different needs. Dave made the point last February that Trinity's voice was lost in the multitude of demands that informs the USI's decision-making process. And our opponents in this campaign would have you believe that Trinity have somehow a more sophisticated set of needs than their colleagues in IT Carlisle. That's particularly one people seem to be going for. I'm going to throw a statistic at you right now, okay? Say there are 100 people in this room. The statistical probability is that 42% of them receive some form of state grant. Okay, and compare that to IT Carlisle, where it's 41%, and UCC Cork, where it's 40%. You can see that the bigger issues already in student politics affect us all. And now, I know local students' unions, they all have different needs. Of course they do. Trinity's located next to the city centre, which brings its own benefits, whereas some IT presidents have to cope with being isolated for about 20 minutes. Some SUs are left to manage clubs and societies, while we have our own dedicated body for that. But on a national basis, we do have the same interests. And those interests, by and large, protecting the grant.
Literally, how is that possible when we showed in a referendum that was relatively successful that we have exactly the opposite interest to what was decided at USI Congress?
I'll move on to that then in a second. I think we can it's part of what I tend to address. But these national issues, they're the ones that unite us, and they make absolute sense to present a united student voice in these combinations. And I said already before in the Trinity event debate that I think any campaign to disaffiliate has to be absolutely contingent on the existence of a credible alternative. You've been told all week that our local students' union can be capable, credible and accountable alternative. Well, how many of you actually really believe that? When was the last time a class rep came to your class and told you how he was going to vote on your behalf at the council? Were you consulted before Ryan Bartlett voted on your behalf on a campaign plan that included an occupation? What about when the Daily Mail was banned and that ban was reaffirmed on your behalf? The point I've been making all week to the people I've been campaigning with is that this doesn't matter as much as it could, because we don't represent, or our local student union doesn't represent Trinity students on a national scale. You can make in-house embarrassments and you're not embarrassing 250,000 students. Perhaps the best example of how Trinity can cope on its own is this much vaunted student loan scheme supposedly negotiated by RSU without USI influence. Let's just clarify what exactly that is and how it came about. The Bank of Ireland approached the college treasurer with a plan for a student loan scheme, and the treasurer then informed the students' union. There was absolutely no initial initiatives in the students' union whatsoever, but if they want to fly that flag for whatever reason, congratulations on bringing a profit-driving commercial product into the college. And even then, their mandate from 2,000 students at the referendum was to pursue a fair student contribution system. But now if the government thinks that there's finance available, that contribution is free to rise. That's a mandate broken, and I have not heard them be held accountable right yet. But then again, if we hold our SU accountable, if we think it's credible, if we think it's capable, by proxy then, we trust that it will hold the USI credible, or accountable, actually, that's the one that holds it. So when I was first asked to debate this, I didn't know who I'd be speaking against, but I presumed there would at least be some member of the opposition represented. What I now have is two debaters, let's face it, hired, and a former SU president with another agenda entirely. When his name was added to the bill, I found it odd to say the least. I know the two previous SU presidents are massive supporters of the USI, so I was really interested in knowing what reasons he had for advocating a yes vote. And then it struck me, he has to be able to make shirking his responsibility to engage responsibly with the National Student Union look like an act of political marketing. His legacy is...
At what point did I shirk that responsibility? At what point did I miss a single meeting last year? At what point did I not attend and vote at all those meetings?
You attended and voted at all those meetings, but I've heard from plenty of people who attended those meetings with you that you had an absolute willingness to negotiate, to engage constructively with members of the USI, that you were dismissive entirely of other colleges for whatever reason, and that's come from the USI office and people who sat on those boards with you, so I don't accept that rebuttal at all. So anyway, there's been a lot of rebuttal there. I want to move on quickly to our own points that make this argument. Representation. However much Dave will tell you that this HEA seat isn't particularly respected, the fact of the matter is USI represents you at the Higher Education Authority, the National Framework for Qualifications, Quality Assurance Board, and more meetings than you care to imagine. They're recognised in law as the sole student representatives. To disaffiliate would be to disengage from the process that allows you a direct audience with the Minister for Education. To think, as many of you seem to, the TCSU could command meetings with ministers in the back of its own reputation is delusional at best and elitist at worst. For one thing, it would be a dangerous precedent if Trinity were allowed an audience with the minister. If Trinity is allowed it, why not UCD? If UCD is allowed it, why not TCU? Where does it end in that sense? And there, Dave, is where a situation in which your voice gets lost in the multitude. Okay, so we all know that currently the USI is mandated by its members to call for a fully exchequer-funded education. Trinity students elected to support a student contribution system, and that's where our problem lies. And if that's your sticking point, and you feel the student movement can make a real contribution to the national funding discourse, get involved, attend a Congress, and change that policy. There's absolutely nothing within USI that is set against change. I'd almost venture as far as saying that the Senate have a responsibility to work constructively with the structures to bring out the change that they so dearly want. Disengagement is a resource of those who lack the capacity to effect change. USI is not entrenched in a free fees policy, it's entirely up to the members to decide. I've run out of time, so I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Just like to drop the speech there and call upon the next speaker from the yes side, ex-President Ryan Bartlett.
Hi everyone, I've been asked here to speak to you today to talk about my personal experiences with USI because there are things that I could tell you that nobody else could and to speak from the things that I've seen firsthand, why they made me not trust USI. And then I'm going to draw the explicit lines for you between what I talked about and how that continues to matter to you, why you should question whether or not USI is good for you, and why I think you should ultimately support the yes vote. First, I want to start by outlining some steps, and I want you to try to picture at what stage along these steps you're at. I call these steps the steps of knowing USI. So the first step is, I don't know what or who it is, and I don't care either. And let's be honest, the vast majority of students find themselves at this stage. Stage 2 is, oh yeah, that sounds cool. These students have probably personally met a USI officer, heard about some of the benefits, and think it sounds really good. That's fine. Stage 3, oh wait, is that it? Stage 3, these students have looked into it, found out that some of the stuff that they told you probably wasn't true, and that there's no positive stuff that they actually managed to leave out. Stage 4, sweet, 3 trips. This is when you get really involved in USI, and you get to go along to the trips away and stuff like that, and you personally see the perks and benefits of having all the Trinity students in USI. And trust me, free trips are good. Stage 5, hello. This happens after a couple of days if you've been tirelessly, enthusiastically trying to do what the students sent you there to do. And then you realise that nobody really wants to listen to you, and they especially don't want to listen to you if you're from Trinity. It's just the facts. So at this stage, you then have a choice. First choice to switch off and ignore it and move on with the rest of your life. Second option, drink the Kool-Aid and decide that you probably want to run for USI officership. The other option you've got is option 3, and that's you get really, really frustrated and wonder, what are people doing? You question why we should prop up this organisation without money and our blind faith, and you may even find yourself writing a speech like this one. So anyway, the reasons why I was annoyed as SU President of USI. The first one is I hate being misled and lied to. And unfortunately, that happens way too often. For example, Jack was just talking there about the things that he's been told by USI about what happened last year, about the fact that there was a vote on a possible occupation. It's just simply not true. What happened was there was no plan for a national campaign from USI, so Trinity SU drew one up. They sent it to USI. USI has edited it to add in the possibility of maybe doing a march, and then at a later stage we might discuss doing an occupation. That plan was approved. Then with no further voting, we proceeded to have a national march immediately, and then an occupation. Yes?
Did you or did you not participate in that approval?
I participated in the approval of possibly having a vote at a later stage, and that vote never happened. The other things we need to talk about is the HCA meetings, where they claim that they go away to represent us. But then they just go off and play the big shot, without considering or asking others, or even informing them what it is that they're doing. Last February, we were in a room like this one when the USI president informed us that if any of the SU presidents wanted to know what the USI was doing at HCA, they should look in the Irish Times. But as we know, whether or not we're a member of USI, we can all read that anyway. I don't have time. Also, not even being told when occupations are going ahead in our name, being informed by Trinity College Treasurer that USI negotiated the removal of the funding for tutorial service without consulting us, and then having to try to work to undo that. Finding out that USI came up with a standardised format for the reg fee being recorded that helped every single one of their member colleges, apart from Trinity, and completely removed the good progress that we've made here in the last 2 years. My other problems include, well, the sit-in, what can I say? It was just plain embarrassing to be compared to and have to work with people who've gone and so ethically self-imploded whilst just trying to get attention from the national media. Why, when you go in and do an occupation with no demands except getting a meeting, and then you find that if you just nicely send an email to the minister, you get that meeting anyway. Another big point I actually really want to talk about is time. A big debate has been whether or not TCSU officers will have the time to work on national campaigns if we leave USI. And the truth of the matter is they will, because it's very easy to make that claim when you've never been an officer of TCSU, but it's not so easy when you have. If you've not wasted a month of your life travelling to attending these meetings where your students are just going to be marginalised or even ignored. It's much easier if you didn't have to spend so much time doing their jobs for them. You can ask questions later. You know, things like the letter writing campaign that we did last year, it was written and edited, and it was edited in by USI, lines which Trinity students proceeded to go away and delete because they found it so objectionable. In truth, if we hadn't been held back by USI, the campaign ran last year in Trinity might have actually achieved something more. It certainly would have been better prepared, better planned, and taken place earlier, and without a shadow of a doubt would have represented the views of Trinity students an awful lot more accurately. Right, so what is USI? I think it's fair to say that USI essentially is a one-trick pony, because all of the USIs are focused on their nose fees mantra. Don't be fooled by their campaigns that we can do so much more. Look at what we do for equality. Because the truth of the matter is, last year, the equality officer and many of the officers reported to the National Council that they spent almost the entirety of October and November working on the march and not doing what they were elected to do. Not to mention the other time of the year when anybody's working on its fees. Also, if you're going to have a one-trick pony, you'd at least expect them to be able to do this trick well. But as you've seen, when I started college, the fees were 900 and they've now gone up to 250. Okay, quickly going back to how this affects you. So more specifically, incompetence and disorganisation. You should feel embarrassed too much when people are going out there and doing things in your name and then being so incompetent. The time. It makes a difference to you if your SU officers have the time to actually spend on things that are going to have an effect on you, rather than trying to do USI's job for them and filling in the gaps. Waste of money. Well, it's your money that you're going away and they're spending, and you're not getting value for that money. I encourage you to, once you hear the benefits, try to add up the value and what you think you're getting out of USI. The one-trick pony. It makes students look as if the only thing we care about is fees. It makes us look like we have complete disregard for all other issues that face the country at the moment. That we don't care about student welfare actually. We'll say we do, but then we won't do anything about it. The voice of USI is being dominated by voices that aren't ours. It's as if we're passing off our speaking rights to somebody who has completely opposite views to us, and then just quietly sitting by with nothing to say. Yeah, okay. There's one other thing I wanted to talk about as well, is that it's not just within USI that people are being misled or imply different things. But students themselves, even if you just take the manifesto, which is a very important point, and you look at every single page, there's things that are not true on it. First off, on the cover, TCSU founded USI in 1959. TCSU didn't even exist then. You go to the back page, and they say that the entertainment officer sits on this group, which they've never been to, and they don't need, because they spend all of their time going around and meeting up with people across the country, and they do that job without needing to go to the entertainment group. Yes, they brought them down, and we spent money this year sending them down to attend a meeting one time, but it's pointless. If people want to go around shouting the odds and saying things that are doing nothing for this college, then they're free to go away and do that. But I don't think that they should be able to do that in my name or with my money, and I don't think you should either.
Thank you for your speech, Ryan. Just before we go on, just to clarify standing orders, so just for this part of the debate, there won't be any points of information from the crowd. But there will be floor speeches and question and answers afterwards. So now just to call upon the second speaker from the no side, Eamonn Bell.
I thank the President for my time. Ladies and gentlemen of the Pro-Disaffiliation Society, it's actually not about you. It's about Trinity students, and it's about students of Ireland. And that's why I'm standing here. That's why I'm in the unlikely position, possibly some might say, to leave me at fourth year in this university, in bedfellows with Jack and John. And I want to explain to you exactly how it's possible. Okay, not literal bedfellows. But certainly, that despite maybe some skepticism that would happen, is absolutely and entirely just to take a stand for them as well. Because sitting in the audience for a similar debate last year, I was absolutely appalled by the insular, myopic vision of a disaffiliated future that was brought today. The contents of your speech alone are reason for my standing here. If 200 more no leaflets have been handed out in this year, handed my role in this campaign, then the yes side have my estimate of college stand here. I am absolutely not motivated out of some warm and fuzzy feeling that USI affords me. Neither am I motivated by a desire to sustain the present local structures that feed the pipeline, the faulty pipeline that runs towards USI. Rather, I have been incited to action by what amounts to a pragmatic attack on the idea of a national students' union. The misguided sense of national duty and the purported political realism that sustains it. I am absolutely delighted to defend this national representative structure from the cynical attempts at its dismantling with this university this week. Through these lenses, the yes case will be summarised astutely and accurately as follows. We are more than happy to participate in a democracy so long as our voice is always respected and our policy is always implemented. Otherwise, as they threaten to do now, no thank you, they will threaten to leave the organisation. This First of all, this is an unconscionable interpretation of what it is to participate in a democratic society. And on account of it, extremely unlikely alliances are forged. So, no, thank you. I'm absolutely convinced that you can join me, and you can join Jack, and you can join if you partake in the one core understanding, which is democratic and the principle of solidarity and the principle behind democratic student movement. And I can do this absolutely in full faith, because there is nothing about the structure of the USI that prohibits criticism of the organisation from within. Its very vocal critics remain members because they believe correctly that institutional reform is possible within the organisation. And I am absolutely not afraid to characterise TCDSU's previous attempts at reform as failures. They failed in plain terms because they were unable to garner the support of other Irish universities. They failed not because of any inherent deficiency in the structure of the union, but because of their inability, no thank you, and because in general of the quality of delegates that tend to get sent to Special Congress with the temptation of a free lunch, which is what happened. To be honest, the reason that I'm absolutely most passionate about this is because the context that we find ourselves in. And it's very easy to examine the context, the very dangerous context of student politics and being a student in Ireland as it is today. And we're going to look at it through the lens of the scheme, the GCD finance scheme, which has been trumpeted as an achievement by TCSU. And Jack has already pointed out that it's not much of an achievement, absolutely not much of an achievement to hook up a bank with people who are willing to loan money off there in these days and age. And I'm certain that there were probably, Ryan and Rory had to sit through any number of extremely boring and entirely uninsightful meetings with the college, but I doubt that in any single meeting that the bank ever offered the students anything that was disadvantageous to the bank. And to tout such a scheme as pioneering is absolutely laughable. Furthermore, it is supremely questionable as to whether a student loan scheme is the correct avenue to pursue in the first place. No, because in the current fiscal environment, Trinity College Dublin has realised today that the level of state funding that we receive does not square with its aspirations to spend it, and it's not going to spend it necessarily on your experience. It is absolutely no coincidence in recent times that college, at the direction of the Provost, has created a post of Vice Provost for Global Relations. Jane Allmeyer is ostensibly promoting the place of Trinity internationally for international students with international schools. College prepares cash to government funding. It prepares corporate investment to state sponsorship. And it will take what it can get with the state, but it prepares the liquidity of fees, and it prepares the liquidity of an alternate solution that you guys purport is Trinity's deserving of. If you read Sean Barrett's response to the terms of reference of this Hunt report, he estimates the value of or the cost of your education as an undergraduate art student, for the sake of example, as around €1,500. No, the student contribution is €2,500. It is plain that the university is not spending the money that it received today on your education, so it is little wonder that they are more than happy to endorse a change from the status quo. The fiscal evidence that I talked about points to a disconnect between the amount coming in per student and the cost of the experience, that which is spent on your education. And this is the kind of differential that college is willing to exploit. This is the kind of differential that the USI protects you against. How do we change this? We certainly do not begin changing this by suspending any chance of impacting on the national dialogue, even temporarily. There is an inevitable lag associated with rebuilding the networks and the relationships and the infrastructures that are necessary and are associated with interfacing with the government on a national level. This time frame, and I'd love a time frame from the Yes camp to say how long will it be before this disaffiliated TCDSU is able to operate on a national level, is absolutely too long given the crisis point that education finance has reached today. John Logue knows full well that during his tenure he could see the tone set for publicly funded education in this country for the next 10 years. A disaffiliated TCDSU may be for the future students. TCDSU working with USI now is for students now. Students who wish to engage at the national level, not in 6 months' time, or not in 2 years' time, but right now when it is needed. And now I'm going to talk about the voice of the other students, the students that are not in this room, the students that do not participate in Trinity College Dublin, that are more than supported by our existence in that union. And I'm absolutely delighted to chip on their behalf. Thousands of students nationally whose voice is strengthened with the support of TCDSU. When TCD students marched in tandem with students from all around the country on the March for Trust, it was not simply an expression of solidarity for the march, but also an acknowledgement that we, as affiliate members of USI, are willing to lend our support to this cause and others, not just on the day, but in terms of democratic work, in terms of national campaigns, and simply our attitude. This is all because, despite what we are hearing, there is a fundamental, real difference between TCDSU as an affiliate and TCDSU as an independent union. Post-disaffiliation, TCDSU will have categorically rejected the idea and the principle behind the National Union of Students. It will have rejected something entirely fundamental which does not only have an effect on Trinity students, but on students nationwide. It will state it, as Dave has done when he characterised the discussion in National Congress as basically we don't agree with you, to the universities and institutions, the institutes of technology around the country, that we no longer tolerate you. This is the message that Trinity is sending out. We no longer tolerate discussion and inter-institutional mandates. The message that we send out, like Dave Dave and Ryan and Ricky today is that you weaken us, that your divergent opinions and your disagreement with us weakens us. And that message is absolutely vile. It is abhorrent and it smacks of an isolationism and an institutional elitism in Trinity College that sometimes make me embarrassed to be a student here. But it gets worse, because in fact not only does disaffiliation weaken the national student movement, but it weakens us. It weakens us much more than remaining in the organisation could ever do. It certainly damages the national credibility of the Students' Union, but furthermore it permits our university to pursue, a different agenda to the rest of the world, a pursuit that is only too ready to commence. Trinity College can now act adversely towards you without incurring the wrath of 200,000 students. This is a tragic loss on our path. Sure, TCDSU will no doubt resist such adverse changes. They'll criticise college, but they will never have that force of 200,000 people. That is the force of a national union, the potential to invoke other members with similar interests to react to threats from policymakers and from the university. The most high-level representative body that a wrong Trinity student will have recourse to is the pitiable talking shop that is XU Council. The same council that spread through this motion, the motion that we're having today, the motion for this very referendum, in order to leave the room that they were in. For the Yes campaign to make lecture addresses also premised on the idea that you'd be €8 richer if you voted yes as shameful. I heard one of those today, but I'm not going to talk about it too much. Look, despite the negative, and the demonstrable negative consequences to students nationally and also in Trinity, we still hear, it doesn't matter. Do you know why? Because there's this assertion that underlies the case for disaffiliation. It is asserted that there is some kind of exceptional property of Trinity College Dublin. That means even if a consensus was reached amongst every other university and institute of education involved in the USI, it would be unlikely to reflect the best interests of TCD. Amongst these reasons will be cited excellence and the usual crap associated with TCD's self-assumed position in the university system. You are being fed a convenient mistruth when you swallow the college's plans for excellence. They refer to excellence not in the undergraduate classroom, but in high technology, high-yield research fields. It is deeply ironic to me that the Yes side cast themselves as political realists when their proposal depends on the fantastically greater workload for TCDSU. A selective ignorance of the work done by many other non-TCD students, and a poor understanding of the political cloud of Trinity College Dublin. And for those reasons alone, I would urge you to vote no.
I'd like to thank Eamonn a lot for his passion, but there's things that Eamonn says there that deeply worry me. Eamonn's gotten up here and, along with a lot of the No Campaign side that have pushed out there, have pushed out this picture that the USI is some sort of democratic government that represents us. No, it's a trade union. It is not this grassroots ideology-based thing where all the answers and ideas come from the bottom and finally find their way up to this one elected presidential system. It works more on a union system where the USI draws up its policy and ideas and passes them down and encourages other SUs to follow them and trickle it down to the students' ways that they follow on that. More depressing than that is the idea that we've gotten from democracy from this side here. And if they want to argue on a principles-based way, I'll take a look at the principle they put us out there. They put us out there that in a principle of democracy, we have to follow one party line of unity and one way of thinking. That's not democracy. The idea of democracy is respect and allowing the idea of the dissenting voice to have its opinion heard and for it to allow to exist. USI is undemocratic in that principalistic sense because it stands up there and says, we are the voice of students. It shuts out the other voices. We are not letting down other students by saying we do not want to be part of this USI. We are standing up for ourselves and our own democratic beliefs that we say we have a fundamental problem with the political ideas that you put out there. We think they are dangerous. We think they damage not only us, but also the wider students. And we think that we are going to go and fight and put these ideas out there and push them forward because we believe they are the right thing to do. That is what democracy is about, not a one-party system. That's another type of government that we don't need to go into. Ladies and gentlemen, we've heard a lot today, a lot from the No side. Firstly, as I've already dealt with these ideas of us democratic principles, what the No side is based on is fear. It is trying to make us be afraid of all the things we will lose if we leave USI. They're not particularly pushing the massive amounts of incumbent benefits that we get from USI, because there aren't particularly a lot of benefits that we do get from USI, especially when you start weighing it up against the massive cost it has against us. They like to tout it as €8 per person because, hey, we all piss away €8 at one point or another on a night out, but they don't like to tout it as the fact that sometimes it adds up to be anywhere between €88,000 to €125,000 coming out of the college year. That is an incredibly big amount of money. That is the kind of money that creates scholarships for students to come to this college and get a chance in the first place. That is the kind of money that would increase the grant of every club and society in this college by nearly 50%. That is a massive amount of money, and it isn't the paltry sum that we're led to believe. Let's talk about what they haven't addressed. They haven't talked about how the USI is elected by us or how they will bring this reform. They haven't shown us this massive democratic link that we have directly to the USI that they're putting forward. But we've shown you, in fact, the massive amount of disconnect that we have as students, not only in relation to understanding or knowing the USI, the way they like it, or the way we have of even electing the USI or maintaining it. They haven't shown us anything to show a greater level of transparency in the referendum, or how they would bring about something like that to make it actually representative and be democratic. Because it wasn't democratic in the mandate that we would give any other thing to be passed. 9,000 votes, 5% of the governing body of the USI, 5% of a population going out in a vote and saying that is a mandate for the people, that is outrageous. That would never be allowed to take place in a legitimate democracy. And we're allowing it to take place here because that's the way things are done. Because we just have to stick with the way things were done because it's scary to leave. We haven't discussed, they haven't come up and told us why on earth it is that the political mandate is so important that they are willing to sacrifice the welfare of individual students, apparently their mandate, by cutting us off from those services to welfare. By the way, which we can pay for with cheaper money, costing us less than associating with the USI to get the same amount of training. They are trying to make us be afraid and make us play on guilt. Because there is a certain amount of guilt you have when you go to Trinity because you're ultimately a Trinity wanker, a rich kid who's better than everyone else. What about those other colleges that have disaffiliated with? UL, DCU, NCAD. Do people shake their fists and spit on them and throw petrol bombs into the out of UL? Do they get looked down upon in society as snobs who abandon their brothers? No, they don't, because that's not what they are. It's not what we will be. We will be people who are standing up and saying that within a democracy, we don't want to be part of one overall controlling system. We want to have a voice that's heard, because our voice isn't being heard at the USA Congress. You heard it from our former president, who went there and said how his voice couldn't be heard. Because we like to talk about this idea that Congress is fully democratic, but Congress is not held in this way, especially when you look at the facts and statistics that David Byrne gave you on how we can have 1,800 votes in our referendum and other colleges with votes weighing up to an excruciating amount of the decisions that were made in that extraordinary meeting, have people of 100 giving them their mandate. The mandate is not clearly done out, and there's no will for this to change. At a USI Congress, your first day is spent campaigning to get your job. Who's going to stand up and be the one to put out a radical idea that completely changes things and puts people off edge that we need to have there? We asked you, Jack, what's the reform you would bring? You said, reform. What's the reform? How do you change something that's so intrinsically opposed to change? Something that's so set in its way that we left it 20 years ago, came back in 10, and we thought the problems were solved. They weren't. The financial ones were, because we kept giving everyone money, but the same endemic problems that stem to it aren't. What is Trinity's alternative when we leave? And Jack came up here and he said a very wise thing. I'm shocked. This isn't just 1 year, one campaign. It isn't. Because this is about what happens in the next 3 to 5 years. Ones that will be pivotal and crucial to the way, that's not correct words, ones that will be pivotal and crucial to the way things play out for students in this country. Not only us in this room, those of us in the first years, and those of us who are coming into this university afterwards. Because we are mandated at the moment to continue for another 3 years following the no fees issue, unless it's overturned, which seems unlikely. For 3 years now, we sit on a seat in the HEA that might as well be empty because our voices of the USI are not heard, because they do not want to deal with that. What we need is to have a reasonable other alternative and another voice. TCD-SU can be that voice. And we know we come up here and say we're not better than anyone else, but it has to be understood that Trinity does hold a considerable amount of clout compared to other universities. We are one of the oldest in the world, we are centralised in the city, we have senators. It's not us being assholes to acknowledge that we do have an advantage over other universities. They talk about how will we ever get a meeting with the Minister for Education. You got one, Jack, so apparently anyone can do it. They talk about say that we can move forward with institutions. It's not cutting ourselves off from other student unions or other student movements. It's cutting ourselves off from a corrupt and overindulgent bureaucratic body like USI, which isn't serving its purpose. It's us saying we are willing to stand together with other universities and other students, other people in humanitarian efforts that go for equality, that go for rights, but we don't want to be joined up with a body that has outserved its purpose, that fails to serve its purpose, which drains money away from us and claims legitimacy towards an idea that we have decided is wrong, that is morally not culpable by us. We are funding that which destroys us. Ladies and gentlemen, we don't need to be afraid to leave the USI. They're afraid of us leaving because they know that people will start to see the cracks in its foundation. We have to make a responsible decision, not only for ourselves, but for all of the other student movements out there. That is why you need to vote yes. That is why we should disaffiliate from the USI. Thank you.
I call upon the final speaker from the no side, USI President John Logue.
Thank you very much. Jesus, Jack, that interview really did backfire on you. I'm going to say something counterintuitive first. I actually agree a lot with what Ryan said. I think it's very, very important to remember that it was about a particular 12-month period. If you look at the longer scope of things, his predecessor, Nikolai Truger-Brockman, thought the USI was a fantastic resource. He said so this week. His predecessor, Conan Byrne, thought the USI was a fantastic resource. And although he is fairly neutral at the minute, I think Mr. Rory Dunn would say the same if he was allowed to speak, although I will not preempt that. My immediate instinct is to address a lot of the points of the proposition, but I think what is most important, first of all, is to describe what we actually agree upon, both the opposition and both you in the room. I believe that everybody in this room wants a student movement that is effective and accountable. I believe everybody in this room wants a student movement that communicates to its members, but also listens to membership. And I believe that everybody in this room wants a student movement that is reflective of the values and the principles that they hold themselves. I think that's very, very important. And when my team and I took office in July, we knew that there were a lot of problems around those issues that had to be fixed. We knew that. For too many years, USI team after USI team have said and have gauged their success on how many students they got out to march in November. And I distinctly remember in February of this year, Ronan Burtonshaw saying, that is not the way to leverage the power of the student movement. And he's right. The only way to do it in Ireland at the minute is to play local politics. So this year, and I say this because I think we're getting back to USI as it should be this year, a proper, effective, accountable organisation. This year, we are changing the national campaign. National marches in Dublin with 20,000 students do not work. Why? Because who's listening? Minister Howland was walking around the back of the march last year tapping people on the head saying, well done. It doesn't work. All politics in Ireland is local, and that's where we have to go this year, and that's where we are going this year. Over the next 10 weeks, we will hold town hall meetings in every constituency in the country. We will be targeting specific TDs, not all 166, because that's foolish. You target the politically vulnerable, the Labour backbenchers, the people who have made statements on education that is against government policy. You play smart, you box smart, and that's how we're working this year. Back to business as usual.
Okay.
We're involving, I'll take it, yeah, go on.
Are you not bound by USI Congress to pursue a mandate that the HEA very clearly told you there is no possibility of you getting anything from?
In terms of what?
In terms of exchequer funded fees.
Well, may I say that I haven't made, and I open to correction, I haven't made any argument in any media interview I've ever done this year on the need to go back to full exchequer funded education. What I say at the minute is that we should look at it over a 5-year period. That is what I've suggested, and I've said the first step in that is to freeze the student contribution. And we've gone about, through my work at the HEA and through my work in the national media, and through USI's work in general, we have gone about that. I don't think we could get it in the budget. I don't think anybody in this room is foolish enough to believe that. And I think I've brought an element of realism to this group. So I'm hoping I answered your question. But to go back to it, we're bringing parents groups, business groups, we're bringing the local community, media involved. Because it's important to realise that when cuts happen to education, it's not just about the student, it's not just about the family, it's society and the community in general that suffers, and we have to remember that. We're bringing together lobbying packs, not just for your students' union, but for you guys on the ground. Because if we want to win a campaign this year, if we want to maintain the level of the maintenance grant, if we want to maintain the student assistance fund, if we want to curtail the increase in fees that is going to be to your detriment, it's not going to be me, and I respect those people who say that, it's not going to be me that wins this, it's going to be you. Your determination, your passion, and your ability to get more people involved in the campaign. I'm not foolish enough to think that USI Officer Board, who are the implementers, not the dictators, that we can do this alone. We have developed a website called notacentmore.ie that's going to highlight the level of waste spending in higher education. The provost of this college and presidents of every other college in the country are saying that there's not enough money to maintain quality, there's not enough money to maintain participation rates. Not one of them, not one person has said how much the sector actually needs. Not one of them is willing to look at the level of waste in the sector. We're going to do it because it's a realistic thing to do for your benefit. We're liaising with non-government organisations and other representative bodies because we don't think that we can do this alone. We're not finished. I will take it, yes.
If Trinity does decide to disaffiliate, will you continue with the USI's mandate not to provide welfare training or access to that training to TCD-SU officers?
Can I deal with that in questions? I am happy to take that point, but just not at this time. Happy enough? Okay. Yes, and we're also, the train of thought back, we are sending 10,000 letters to local businesses across the country because we need to inform the country as a whole that cuts in education are bad for the country. When the student contribution goes up, when the maintenance grant is cut, that is less money for the local economy, that is less money for the local businessman, that is more money that parents have to invest in their children, taking away from their day-to-day necessities. We can't frame this as the poor student anymore. It has to be about the country as a whole, and that's what we're getting to. And I say all this to show you that USI is not what has happened over the last 12 months. We are a far bigger organisation than that. As you've seen from the predecessors of Ryan and his predecessor, we've had successful years, and we're back there again. And three issues I want to address primarily that have been raised by previous speakers. The first is that USI does not reflect the views of Trinity students. 3 months ago, the Department of Education engaged the Bank of Ireland for a postgraduate loan, to create a postgraduate loan. They came back with an interest rate of 10.8%. Is that a minute? I can be very, very quick. 10.8%. Basically, every academic, every student in the country said that was absolutely not acceptable. The most ludicrous loan scheme ever devised. What we did was two things, long-term and short-term solutions. Short-term, we engaged the Irish League of Credit Unions, and a majority of credit unions in the country now are now offering lower interest rates because we made representations to Bank of Ireland. Also, we invited every postgraduate representative group in the country, including the Graduate Students' Union and representatives of TCD Students' Union, to come together in Dublin to decide what would be the most fair and equitable loan scheme for postgraduates in this country. We created a document around that, we put a bit of research to it, and we put it to the Minister. For the next academic term, it is highly likely that that scheme will be implemented, and postgraduate students in this college will have benefited from USI's actions in that regard. We also curtailed the local authorities issue of tying the household tax to the maintenance grant. They were basically saying that if your parents didn't pay the household tax, you as an individual citizen could not get access to a maintenance grant. We put the lawyers on it, we had a media war. I'm going to go on as far as Eamonn did for the crack here. And we won that. They backed down within 24 hours. Some people say that USI doesn't communicate effectively with our members. The best thing we could have done, and I openly admit it, and I hate to say it, we hired the editor of the University Times who did it for us. We increased our media output by 80% this year, and our social media presence has never been better. We even employed a Trinity student, for Christ's sake. That's how much we're doing. And Dave, we have a new website. I would encourage you to look at it. It's beautiful, and we got it for €50. Talk about getting results for cheap.
On that point.
Go for it.
You said last week it cost €100.
No, I said if anybody wants to read my work, I don't know how you said I got 100, but it was €50 for the thing. I'm happy to give anybody the receipt they want. We bought it pre-made. I'm going to continue on if you don't mind. The big question is what will happen if TCD-SU decide on Thursday that they no longer want to be a part of the USI. I am not going to stand here and scaremonger. I'm not going to stand here and give you the worst case scenario. All I'm going to say is that if TCD, if TCD Students' Union decide to leave, it would be to the detriment of the student movement. Not only students in this college, but students across the country. TCD, UL and DCU could theoretically work together, but it's been tried in the past. It was called FUSI. Why couldn't they do it? Because they had no seat at the decision table, there was a bell ringing in his ear, and they had no executive to take from meeting to meeting and actually implement the policies. We are not dictating policy. We are not dictators. We are not those people. We are the implementers of the policies that you decide. This sounds like some weird lobby there. This thing here. So I'm going to, in short, you have a huge decision to make. You have to decide whether you think that USI is beyond fixing. My point here is that yes, USI had a bad 12 months. Organisations have bad spells. We've had great spells in the past, and I think we're in a great spell now. He's going to hit me in a minute, so I'm going to finish there. Please, please, vote no. Thank you very much.
John and for all our speakers in the debate there. We are tight on time, but we'll have time for 1, 2 and 4 speeches on either side if they're willing. We have willing speakers for proposition, and we have willing speakers for opposition. Yeah, okay, yeah. So, who would like to go for proposition? Yeah, sure. 2 minutes, yeah. And sorry, for this point, we're all go for opposition after this, but there will be points of information from the floor open for this for these 4 speeches.
We've only got 2 minutes.
Okay, just a few simple thoughts I had throughout the course of the debate, and hopefully we get them across without as much vitriol as the other speakers had. But just a couple of things that, in particular, Eamonn and John brought up. You know, Eamonn brought us this thing about, in theory, why don't we all just get really involved in USI and it'll be grand. I just don't really buy it. I just think in terms of the amount of time students have to go through their issues, I think the things that they do day to day, I think the amount of involvement Eamonn's talking about is pretty unrealistic, really. And I don't think if we all just, you know, jump in on the USI bandwagon, that's going to be grand. To be honest, I think if it was just a Trinity Students' Union that was looking after our interests, I would find it a lot easier to approach someone like Ryan or Rory Dunn and say, why aren't you doing a better job, you know, in your meetings with the Minister, than it would be to say, why isn't, you know, John doing a better job in his meetings with the Minister. And I think both John and Eamonn undermined their own arguments later on. Or sorry, it wasn't John, it was Jack and Eamonn, by ragging on the Trinity Students' Union so much. You know, they're saying, oh, they're a pitiful union, they can't get anything done. Well, how's the USI meant to work if it doesn't rely on the proper participation of a well-functioning union, Trinity Students' Union? So make up your mind, lads, does it work or does it not? If it doesn't work, well then the USI isn't going to work either. And then just lastly, one thing I really was quite annoyed about, to be honest. I think everyone on the proposition said again and again, you know, it's not representative, you're talking about reform, what's going to happen, and they literally were just out of ideas. They brought nothing, and I think that really is to their shame. I think it was a predictable question that was going to come, and they really were out of ideas. No thanks. And
they want the ideas?
No thanks. Yeah, you can bring it up, I'm sure, at some point. And just one last thing, one question I want to ask, I might be breaching procedure here a little bit, but just, it might be for John or anyone else might be able to answer this, but what proportion of our funding goes to pay the salaries of the officers in USI and administrative costs associated with USI? Thanks.
And just, who wants to make a force for opposition voting?
Okay, first of all, I'd like to say I'm not a debater, so I can't match I suppose, the emotive and the articulate and eloquent arguments that they made there earlier. I'd just like to give my perspective on it, okay? This time last year, I was not a USI convert by any means. I was primarily working for the Students' Union because I liked University Times and I wanted to edit it. So I was a sucker for some of the stories that came up. Ryan came to me and said, why don't we disaffiliate from USI? Because, you know, he was justifiably unhappy with some of the things that happened, particularly the occupation. Okay, so at that point, I was firmly on the fence, leaning towards Ryan's side. What happened thereafter? What happened thereafter was I experienced from talking to Rachel and Louisa and other sabbatical officers around the country that USI is not, as Ryan put it, a one-trick pony. USI has never just been about organising one march per year. USI does so much more than that. For LGBT community, we had the largest presence on the March for Marriage during the summer, okay? We organised Pink Training, which is the largest LGBT training event in the UK and Ireland, okay? Bar none. And, right, okay, but, sorry, no, sorry, I wasn't taking a point. As for this ludicrous point that TCDSU will not be be listened to or cannot be listened to. TCDSU, all it has to do to be listened to is to engage more. And I know that you guys have rubbished that entirely, but that is the case. You make persuasive arguments at Congress. You transcend the Trinity snobbery that you might perceive at Congress. We sent 18 delegates to Congress, and not in the past, we haven't had in the past 3 or 4 years a statesman-like president, and that's not ragging on you, Ryan. You have an idea of the union at a local level as an apolitical service-providing organisation, and that's fine. But if you want to really change USI, you have to afford a statesman-like president. Like, for instance, I know maybe everyone was a fan of his, Conan O'Brien, who did change USI, who was in there as deputy president, who worked with Guy Redmond, who had the large, who himself and Redmond turned out the largest student march in years. They had upwards, I think, of nearly 40,000 people. After that, what did they do? They registered almost 15,000 students before the general election. They brought the weight of students to bear on TDs in this country, and prior to that, Conan O'Brien, working even at a local level, got the Greens to take fees off the agenda for government in the programme for government of Fianna Fáil. So do not tell me for a second that TCDSU cannot work within USI to change it. All TCDSU has to do is to engage with the structures. The contention that USI is undemocratic is absolute nonsense. I've been there. That's why I was ultimately persuaded to go back to the other side of the fence. Because you go to Congress, you send delegates to Congress, arguments come from the ground up. Presidents do not set the policy in USI. Do you know what happens when presidents set the policy in USI? They get fired very quickly and are forced to resign. Right? So it's a grassroots organisation. You build it from the ground up. That's why every single sabbatical officer I've met in the past, God knows how long, likes USI, recognises that it gives training to people, recognises it gives training to officers, recognises that it gives training to the LGBT community, and recognises that together we are stronger with USI. And okay, I should stop there. So. The fact of the matter is, okay.
Thanks. We'll just do a few questions to the panelists. Please keep your questions brief if you can.
Yeah, this is mainly to John, just Ronan as well. Just when you guys outline all the benefits that USI brings, can I just ask you, do you really think that it's not possible for that to happen? Like, if we disaffiliate, that TCDSU and USI could work together on issues that they agree with, and that we could reap those benefits without having all the negatives that this side has outlined?
Well, it determines what you mean by benefits. Do you mean like benefits as in grants, fees, graduate environment?
Yeah, well, you talked about all the, what you think, you guys have brought to us. Do you not think that those things are very much possible, just working together as different?
No, I think it's a rational thought, but what happens then is you get a la carte membership of USI, where people just pick in as they choose. Just to give you, I suppose, a historical context for it, we had a situation up until 2 years ago where non-affiliates of USI could come to the training events if they just paid a little bit more than affiliates. And what happened was there was absolutely, they were just saying it, well, if USI defeat fees, if USI maintain the grants, we get that anyway. But that's not the idea of a national solidified movement. We can't have this situation. We can't have a situation where it's a la carte picking and choosing of what you want and what you don't want.
So your aim isn't essentially to get these sort of movements that you want unless there's financial support?
What I'm saying is, we have a umbrella group of students, say whatever you want to call the figure, say it's 200,000, 250,000 students across this island. We then ask them through their students' unions and through delegates of Congress, what are the issues they want to work on, and we work on them. You have to remember here that we're the implementers, we're not the dictators of policy. So therefore, just to give you an example, TCD voted on the motion not to allow other member organisations who weren't affiliates to attend SUT or student union training because they didn't think it was fair on people like TCD who were paying money. So it just ends up, it's a slippery slope after that. I mean, it's a rational thought, but it ends up being a slippery slope.
It's not just financial support, it's political support as well.
Yeah.
Okay.
So they have to agree with you.
You guys will have to move on to another question.
Could I ask a question as well?
We'll just keep going from over on, sorry. Back there, yeah.
Could I just expand on that question? If TCD were to disaffiliate and had a vote that happened to agree or had a policy that agreed with the USI policy, could you envisage coordinating whatever structures, such as the campaign that you're talking about, could you envisage working together in that respect if your policies aligned in
No, I mean, it's a fair question. I mean, look, the easy and sneaky answer I could give would be no, we would cut off ties. But I mean, just to give you an example, and I'm not going to sit here and promise you and lie to you. We have worked with UL on the household tax maintenance grant issue purely because we needed UL to send students down to a local authority or county council in that particular time. We had 4 hours to get as many students as possible. But even UL would acknowledge, and DCU acknowledge, because they're actually holding a referendum of their own volition later this year, that USI isn't just about the political side of it. There is so much more in terms of advice and training that you get that the membership is worth it anyway. So, I mean, I can't honestly sit here and lie to you and say, oh, we'd cut absolutely all ties, but I mean, it would be de facto that you wouldn't be getting calls from us and we wouldn't be taking calls from you.
Reasonable. Okay.
Yeah, let's go to the back one here.
Actually, I would have change what I was going to say firstly. Firstly, I have to disagree completely with what John was just said there. Sorry. My problem with that is you're saying you wouldn't be making calls to units or be accepting them, but in terms of the ad taken out paper last year, I know it wasn't yourself, but in my experience of USI, they have actually been more forthcoming with calls to non-affiliate organisations such as DCU than the unions that were affiliated, such as with the Liars campaign. As far as I know, the campaign was kind of, DCU were offered a chance to get in on the campaign, whereas I think the first that our RCO heard of it was, oh yeah, have a look at the Irish Times, lads. So, firstly, I guess that's
Do you want me to address that? I think that's a fair point. I mean, I haven't engaged with DCU at all this year. I mean, if they want to come to me, they can do so. I won't be running that to them. I have enough members to worry about without looking at non-affiliates.
So what did you say about the fact that what did you say about the fact that I suppose the non-affiliated organisations are actually nearly getting preference over?
Well, just from my own personal perspective, it's a valid question. From my experience from July 1st when I took over, that hasn't been the case.
Okay, that's more questions.
I don't know if the yes side would deny it, but what it seemed to me tonight that it was really a case of ideology when it comes down to it. It's not really about reform and democracy, because what you hear from particularly Ryan and Dave is that free fees aren't feasible, which isn't true. They say that marches and sit-ins aren't any sort of tactic. But what you see with what happened in Quebec a few weeks ago, they reversed rises to the contribution there. That isn't untrue. So I just would be interested in knowing how they feel that we'd be more protected or that our needs would be served better under an SU, under Trinity SU, when our very own SU president stood up here at the debate last year and said that the majority of Trinity students are implicitly against the USI's fees policy. I don't really see how students' needs are being best served if you're under that sort of leadership.
Okay, yeah, well, I mean, I guess to answer your first bit of your question there, really, about the fees, but it's not that it's not feasible or anything else. The point really is if USI's, and if the point of all this is to represent the views of students, the point was that Trinity students have voted to say that their views aren't the views that are now being represented. But I mean, that's not just the problem here. We talked about a lot of these things, and maybe I should have been more explicit when I went through the list of things that I discovered and had frustrations with. That it wasn't just the last 12 months. Correctly identified was Conan Byrne, who did try to go and fix USI from the inside, did run for deputy president of USI, did do that job for a few months, and did get disheartened and disillusioned with it because he was trying to pass those reforms and didn't succeed. And one of the reasons before I went away and wait a second, let me finish this, because it's really, really important to understand the number of years that we're talking about here. Because the complaints that I had and outlined this evening aren't just from the last 12 months. If you go and search the Students' Union Present Computer, and then you go and get the floppy disks out of the back, you'll find that the files on the floppy disks have the exact same sort of list of complaints. That people have gone and tried to do reforms at USI Congress for many years. For years, the before and after we last affiliated and disaffiliated, for years before I was even born. So for at least since computers have been around, these problems have been around. I can't speak for the first few years of USI, but at least since then, these problems have been there. And this isn't about just a political thing of saying, no, we don't like the no fees. It's about saying we're pretty much fed up and out of time for waiting for this reform to happen.
Okay, we'll give John a chance to
Do you know, it's just a point of information. Conan didn't leave because he got fed up. He left because he got a 5-year job.
Oh yeah, he got a job, but it doesn't change.
Any questions?
I'd just like to ask, isn't there a possibility that we could re-affiliate to USI after a few years? As John has said, USI does get better, it does reform itself as they all want. And surely it'll put a lot more pressure on USI to reform itself. If so many of the universities, the major universities in this country, like TCD and UCD, who are also debating disaffiliating from USI, actually leave, surely we could actually have some real reform where there's an impetus to get those universities back into USI.
Do you think that the reform that would be implemented, if that happened, would be reflective of the reform that TCD students want, if they weren't involved in the conversation about the reform? I think that's
Can I also make a follow-up point on that, okay? And okay. Here's the crux of the issue. Suppose TCD were to leave in the morning, and suppose UCD, not wanting to fall too far behind the heels of TCD, because the rankings of the list decided they were going to leave as well. And then McCormack decided, you know what the hell, we're going to go as well. We are, and every president will tell you this, but unfortunately I have the distinct honour of saying it's true. We are in the most important 5 years of Irish higher education growth. We are going, according to Minister Quinn, to €3,000 per student contribution, which is going to swing public opinion behind some form of student loan or income contingent student loan scheme. That's what they're playing at in the department. Now, not one person in any higher education institution, not one member of the HEA, not any president or provost in this country knows how much money that their college needs to maintain quality while maintaining increased participation rates. So what's going to happen is, like happen in the US, happen in the UK, happen in Australia, that we are going to have an exponential rise in fees, not to quality maintenance purposes, but far beyond that. And then we're off to the races, because you've got the £9,000 that happened in the UK last year, and lo and behold, what happened? A 17% drop in participation. 65,000 less students went to college last year in the UK because of student loan came in. That's the kind of stuff that's coming down the line. And you want to leave? This is the time we need to hunker down and get together and sort our shit out, not go off and think that you've got a hierarchy and that you can do things better. What the hell on?
Okay, well, let's have one more question before you get proposed.
No, can we answer that now?
Yeah,
yeah, well, I feel like if they can make a response, maybe so should we. So we had Ronan and we had Gary Redmond last year insisting that what decides the mandate of USI is the people voting, in this case, in last May's case, the referendum. And you're talking here about public opinion swinging behind perhaps an alternative solution like student loans or something else. Like, if you're behind that, then have you not totally ignored the mandate that these lads are saying?
What I am saying is that if Minister Quinn follows through on this €3,000 increase, that public opinion, by virtue of necessity, not equity or not want, by virtue of necessity, because they won't be able to afford it, and Minister Quinn knows that, they will swing behind an alternative model. What I am saying is an alternative model for higher education funding in this country would lead to the vast detriment of every single person and their successors in this institution.
So you are committed to 100% of funding fees?
I'm committed to the mandate of the institution, which can be changed every single year. It has to, well, can I just make, I am the implementer of policy, I am not the dictator. If I decided in the morning that I wanted every one of you to pay 10 grand up front, I couldn't do a damn thing about it, because I'd be fired in the morning. If you wanted me at Congress...
Thanks, Paul. Let's have another back.
I just wanted to comment on what Ronan said in his speech about Pink Training. Pink Training is one of the best events for LGBT people in the country, and also, you know, for the UK as well. Now, Trinity students, if we disaffiliate, we can still attend that event. That motion was put forward to Congress by our president, Bartlett, last year, and was passed. So even as non-members, that is the one event we can still go to, just as a point. So it's sorry.
Okay, last one impression here.
Yeah, so I'll be organising Pink Training this year, and I think it's evident the fact that Ryan did propose this notion at our annual Congress last year that non-affiliates should be able to attend it. Ryan obviously recognised that the LGBT campaign had actually been significantly weakened by the fact that these non-affiliates can't attend. So we obviously see that. Now I know from this year, the amount of emails I'm getting every week from non-affiliates wanting to attend Pink Training, that we will just not be able to accommodate everybody, and the numbers that we will be allowing from non-affiliated colleges to attend that event is significantly small, very small in comparison to our full members, and they will have to pay full cost for us.
Okay, I'm afraid we'll have to wrap it up there, but it's like I'm sure the panelists will welcome questions after if you want to try to give a shot then. So we'll just do an exit vote. Paul, you just been mentioned here. So all those who would now vote yes in this House of disaffiliated from the USI, please raise your hands. Okay, and all those who would vote no? And all those who are undecided? Yes, I think we're at 5 people left during the thing. So yeah, so to start with, we had 50 people for, 39 saying no, and 26 undecided. And we now have 62 for, 43 no, and 5 undecided. So an increase in both yes and no, and an increase in undecided. So great debate, guys.